Aloha and welcome to Thumbing Through Yesterday, the podcast where we take our favorite books from the shelf, blow the dust off them, and remind ourselves why it is we love them so. My name's Tom Galley, and joining me today we have Tony Pasculi.
Happy to be here, Tom.
And today we're revisiting one of my favorites from the dim and distant past, H.G. Wells with The War of the Worlds.
All right, so the dim and distant past, when is the last time you read this?
The last time I read it, it's probably only been 2 or 3 years.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, okay, good. So this is a true favorite then.
Yeah, I would dare say I've probably read this 10 times since I was introduced to it.
Wow. Okay. What keeps you coming back to this book?
You know, there's just a couple things. One is such a fantastic story. I mean, this is early days of sci-fi, and I think it's very well written for the most part. There are a couple of notable exceptions that we can get into. I am just thrilled with the state of the art at the time.
Yeah.
The science of the day is applied to the matter of the invasion of the Martians, the beliefs about what Mars was like. It's just thrilling to look at that stuff and see how certain they were of their certitudes and whatnot. And this is silly, but I love the war machines, the idea of the tripod war machines. And one of the things I've been unable to forgive any of the movies that have brought this to the screen so far is the fact that none of them use tripod war machines until this most recent Tom Cruise abomination.
Yeah.
And
that was disappointing.
That was a lot to suffer through just to see the tripod war machines. And they didn't walk correctly, so they still haven't done it yet. But yeah, I mean, I think it's good sci-fi. I think it's a good story. It gets bogged down in description a couple of times. But yeah, it's a good tale.
It's interesting. Okay, so I haven't read this probably since I was 10. And then everything I know of it is like, it's sort of pop culture now. You hear about the Orson Welles radio play, and there's been many, many film adaptations, and it gets worked into, it features in Buckaroo Banzai.
Yep.
So I haven't gone back and read it in a long, long time. And I was impressed with the quality of the writing for the most part. It gets a little purple in places. But just on a sheer craft level, it's pretty solid.
Yeah.
And the science fiction is thrilling. There's a couple of info dumps, and I actually enjoyed those. I don't find it as compelling as a story, mostly because I had an intellectual fascination with the way the story is told, but I don't care for the characters, who are mostly passive observers.
I had forgotten in a way how little actually happens in this story.
Very little.
It's all recounted from other sources after the fact.
Yes.
Our protagonist spends more than half of the invasion hiding in a basement.
Yeah.
Literally.
And he's the one, by his own testimony, who has seen more of the Martians than any human alive. And yet he's seen them on a half a dozen occasions at pretty close range compared to most people. But he spends, like you say, he spends the entire book just, either on the run or hiding. And the running isn't particularly exciting, and the hiding is pretty grim also.
Yeah.
That said, as a historical artifact, this is amazing. Oh my God. Like his description of the heat ray, which is obviously a laser, but lasers haven't been invented and won't be invented for another 60 years.
Yeah.
But he's talking about some sort of focused beam, which you can't do with just radiative heat, but you could do with a laser. And he makes his best guess at it, and it's like, but that's so obviously a laser.
Yeah. Well, again, but they didn't have a term for it.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have lasers. They couldn't do that at the time at all. Yeah. And this is the thing that impressed me the most about this book, because one of the things that everybody knows is that the Martians come and then suddenly they mysteriously die of bacteria. It's like, oh, whoops. And it's just presented as completely anticlimactic. It's like, that's it. It's over. But Wells does an incredible job of setting that up. He talks in a very early passage about infusoria, which is a word I had to look up, just in the context of, the state of science in the world. He talks about the red ferns, the red growth, the plants, which they brought maybe by accident, no one knows, and how they quickly succumb to Earth's bacteria that cause rot and putrescence. He mentions pretty like halfway through the book, I want to say, and this is obviously he's telling this from the perspective of having survived the attack and looking back. But he drops this in about midway through the book for the reader that the Martians have no native bacteria on Mars.
Yep.
Yeah. So it's set up again and again and again and again. So in fact, when it comes, it feels inevitable and not just like a cheap out. So it's very well done. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's. I love the fact that we're not helpless against the Martians, but we are really close to helpless against the Martians.
Yes.
We see a few of them get killed, one of them get damaged, but we're clearly the underdogs in this fight.
Yeah.
Except for germs.
Yeah.
Yay, germs.
Yeah. Man will always be dominant on this planet because we have paid the price in billions of deaths to develop an immunity to germs.
Isn't that just beautiful to think of it that way?
Yeah, I like the fact that they do fight back, even though they're outclassed. And, making allowances for the time, there's not a swift form of communication. So like the first commander that he runs into, he's like he's with the artilleryman, and the artilleryman's giving a description of the Martians and their heat ray, and the lieutenant just says, that sounds like nonsense. And of course they all get wiped out.
Yeah.
So that's unfortunate. But they do bring down one of the tripods, mostly by accident.
Yeah, but they do.
Yeah.
Just with the artillery guns. And the Martians aren't happy with them for doing that, I did find that was interesting. The machines, the war machines, just seem to be a crew of one in each.
Yes.
Although they're monstrous. I mean, they stand over 100 feet tall.
Yeah.
They carry around baskets, which they throw people into to collect people, and they also walk around. The weapons are external. They carry the heat gun as a separate thing. They carry the gas rockets as a separate thing.
I found that fascinating also, the sort of, it's like he talks about them towering over the houses of the village, which are 2 stories tall.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, if these things were invading downtown New York, you could drop bricks on them from the balcony.
Different world, different time, yeah. Because even in London, they towered over the cityscape. I thought London probably had 100-foot tall buildings at this point in history, but oh well.
Yeah. London, the greatest city in the world, according to Wells.
Yeah.
The pinnacle of civilization. And sort of one of the recurring themes of this novel is, humanity humbled by that which we do not know. We were unprepared for the Martians. We didn't know how to respond. We weren't in the same league. Who knows what else is out there? Yeah.
Yep. Now I love, and this thing is chock-a-block full of little details.
Yeah.
But early on, so the first firing was seen on Mars, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then they proceed at 24-hour intervals.
Yeah.
So they've got a gun, big gun, probably built down into the surface of the planet. And once every 24 hours, it comes back into alignment with little old England, which is where they've chosen their invasion. I didn't remember that. I remembered it being a worldwide invasion, oddly enough. But no, every cylinder falls on little England. But I love that detail. It's like just once a day, the gun lines back up and they get to fire it. And as good as the science of the day was, clearly they don't know the length of the Martian Sol. But whatever.
Or Wells doesn't. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's entirely possible. It's kind of remarkable that he thinks that you could fire a living creature in a bullet from a gun. That basically all of the acceleration has to happen instantaneously at one end to carry you from one planet to another. They'd be pulp.
It's Mars. It's 1/6 of our gravity. Escape velocity is much lower. It's completely feasible.
Yes, and then they land on Earth if they survive that. Yeah.
Yes. Smack.
Yeah.
These quivering. Okay, this is as good a point as it. So our first description of a good look at this thing. 2 large, dark-colored eyes were regarding me steadfastly. The mask that framed them, the head of the thing, was rounded and had, one might say, a face. There was a mouth under the eyes, the lipless brim of which quivered and panted and dropped saliva. This goes on for a couple of paragraphs. This is Lovecraft. This is straight up Lovecraft.
Oh, yeah.
You can't read this and go, H.P. was not influenced by this guy.
There's an element of cosmic horror to this novel, and he doesn't lean into it quite as much as Lovecraft. I mean, the genre didn't exist then, but the idea of cosmic horror is that, you think you're safe on your little rock under the atmosphere, your cozy blanket of air, but no, there are terrors out there that you could not comprehend. And that's exactly the kind of the point he's making here. They show up and there's only 10 of them, and they do some damage, but then bugs, but yeah, it changes man's estimation of his place in the universe. We're not at the top of the pecking order. We're somewhere much closer to the bottom.
Yep.
That's cosmic horror. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautiful. And this is in the first chapter that we're getting. Well, not the first chapter, but right after the Martians have made their appearance. Yeah, I would read the whole thing, but it's several pages long. But again, I read this and I couldn't help but it's like, this is Lovecraft, right? Mm-hmm. This would be perfectly at home in a Lovecraft story.
Except that Lovecraft wasn't near the writer that Wells is.
Yes. Yes, I will concede that.
One of the things I appreciate about this, despite my earlier complaint that there's not a lot of incident, is the slow build. And I think that's because he's, I believe, inventing a genre here with this. That this might be the first alien invasion story. I don't know. But it's certainly among the very first. And so you can't just take that as a given. You can't just have, okay, and then the aliens showed up and we were fighting them and da-da-da-da, as like so many modern movies we have. He has to lay the groundwork very carefully. And this one cylinder shows up and everyone's like, ooh, it's a meteorite. No, it's a manufactured thing. Mm-hmm. I wonder if they're friendly. Let's talk to them. Let's wave a flag. This goes on for days, and they slowly wait till the cylinder cools, and they open it, and they crawl out, and they're still trying to talk to this thing, and people get bored and walk away, and then the heat rays start.
There's a fruit vendor that shows up.
Yeah.
They're selling sweets and whatnot. Now, there are not many mistakes in this book, and that's a mistake.
You think so?
Well, the thing is, not laying the groundwork, but as you said, this goes on for days.
Yes.
The gun is firing every 24 hours. After the second cylinder, they're landing every 24 hours.
Yes.
But for some reason, there's a gap. We're given a few days to explore the terror of this first cylinder before the second one shows up.
You're right.
Even though it was launched 24 hours later.
Yeah, good point.
You know, orbital mechanics being what they are, maybe it was a longer path.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah. As I was reading, it's like, oh, but okay, right? It's a detail.
Yeah. This reminds me of, believe it or not, and I'm trying to make a favorable comparison here, Independence Day.
Okay.
Which I really enjoyed when it first came out because it also has that sort of slow buildup that gives the whole alien invasion a lot of gravity. And, you know, people are sort of collecting and they're planning what they're going to say to the aliens, and they're having alien viewing parties on rooftops and waving signs, and nobody knows their intent, although it's pretty freaking ominous, you know, because they've settled themselves over major cities. And then the war starts. You know, it's like 30 minutes into the movie is when the first calamity happens, I believe. It's a very, very slow build. Yeah. It reminded me of this. And it sets that movie up very well for, you know, by the time it gets silly and Will Smith is punching an alien, you know, you're already invested.
Yeah. It differs a little bit in that in Independence Day, it's a kickoff, right? Yeah. All the aliens fire at once, you know, and we transition from, hey, what's going on to, oh, crap. Yes. You know, and in this one, even when the Martians reveal themselves as hostile, there's not that much panic. I mean, right next to them there are, but, you know, it's like, oh, okay, well, that's all right. The Army's going to take care of it. They'll be dead by tomorrow. Yeah. You know, and you get more than a few miles outside of the impact zone, nobody's even believing it. They're still not believing that the Martians are actually there.
That's why this is so fascinating as a historical artifact, because there's no cell phones, there's no Facebook and Twitter.
There's no mass media.
There's no mass media. There's newspapers, but newspapers take a full day to prepare, and you have to have a reporter on site to get the news.
And we have a couple of characters who run off to telegraph their newspaper.
Yes.
You know, and we even have one example of one that the newspaper gets the message and then is unable to verify it and refuses to print it.
Yeah,
they can't verify it because the guy was killed by the heat ray, you know?
Yeah.
Speaking of which, our protagonist runs in some pretty elite circles.
He does.
Yeah. He's a philosophical writer of some sort, and yet he knows everybody who's everybody that's related to astronomy or horticulture or zoology or the military.
Well, he's a Victorian gentleman, and that's that's kind of a thing. That society was much. There was an elevated part of society which was much smaller, and everybody did know everybody. They would frequently gather, and you would go, and because there was no Netflix at home, your entertainment was you would go take in a lecture at the Royal Society of Astronomy, and you would meet the astronomers afterwards. And if you're a gentleman, of course, they would smoke a cigar with you afterwards. So I found that actually pretty credible and interesting. And it's the kind of thing that we there's a little bit of class distinction happening when he's talking about the masses running away.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even more so when we get to is it the artilleryman who comes back at the second half of the book? He's got the plans. Oh my God. He's, on the one hand, this feels like an L. Ron Hubbard sort of, we're going to fight back against the aliens and we're going to win. And on the other hand, it sounds like an absolute lunatic who's like, well, now that the old world order has been destroyed, it is time to rebuild the new world order in my image. This guy's terrifying. Yeah. There's no room for the weak. We can't have people who are, in any way not able to carry the weight. They'll be doing a disservice to humanity to let them live. Well,
a lot of the things he talks about in that context, you can see where he would get there.
Yeah.
I don't agree with him, but at least our protagonist has the ability after a couple of days in his company to go, this guy's Looney Tunes, I'm moving on.
Yes. Oh, yeah. I don't put this on our protagonist at all. I put it on the artilleryman who is clearly either lost his mind from the calamity, which is,
a lot of that going around.
Yeah, certainly possible, or has discovered an opportunity to reveal his true self, which is what I tend to believe.
Yeah.
That's calamity does that to some people. It's like, oh, now I can do this. Yeah. So
it's interesting the idea that we would just become a subterranean race of scrappy fighters living under the feet of the Martians, but secretly coming out. It's very Terminator. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. And I like that aspect of his plan. It's like, we're not going to give up. We're not going to surrender. We obviously can't win. So we're going to go into hiding until we can, and then we're going to come back and wipe them out. That seems a little optimistic, but it's better than nothing.
Yep.
Yeah. But his vision of this new society and what it is? He's not regretfully saying we won't be able to accommodate everyone and there are some parts of society we won't be able to welcome into our sewer system. He seems to be enjoying the fact that he's going to get to play God.
Yes, indeed.
So, yeah. Speaking of God, I read an essay, which has come to the end of my book, saying how Wells was not a fan of religion, and he put the curate in there specifically to bang about religion, which I don't buy. But there is a good quote here where the curate's kind of falling to pieces, and the protagonist says to him, "What good is religion if it collapses under calamity? Think of what earthquakes and floods and wars and volcanoes have done to men. Do you think God had exempted Weybridge? He is not an insurance agent." But I love that idea that, I think Wells is okay with the idea of someone being a man of faith. But if your faith evaporates in extremity, then what purpose is it? You don't need faith to live in the modern world. You need faith to deal with adversity. And the curate's faith abandons him immediately.
Yep.
So.
What an awful character that curate is.
Oh, my God.
And at the end, our protagonist is forced to deal in a very harsh way with the curate.
Yes.
But the way it's written, and I went back and went over this a second time, and the curate's about to go and announce himself to the Martians, and our hero grabs a meat cleaver and comes up behind him. At the last minute, he changes his mind and he strikes him with the butt of the cleaver, and the curate falls insensate to the ground. The noise attracts a Martian. Our hero hides. The curate gets taken away. Fast forward a couple of chapters. Now our hero is looking back on this and feels like he actually killed the curate. Like the striking him on the head was fatal.
Yes.
Not that he had rendered him insensate. And that, I don't know, that there's just a inconsistency there that bugs me.
Huh. What's the inconsistency
for
you?
If he actually killed him, what was the point of flipping the thing around? Well, if your intention was to kill somebody, if my intention was to kill somebody with a cleaver, I would have gone blade first.
Interesting. I didn't get that. I don't think his intention was to kill him. My impression was that he intended not to kill him, simply to stop him. He was attempting to be merciful, but that he struck him hard enough to kill him anyway.
Oh, is that how you? Okay.
That's how I read it. Yeah.
But I liked the fact that he regarded the incident without remorse.
Yeah.
It was a tasteless, it was a difficult memory, it was a bad memory, but he did what had to be done, and there was no reason to castigate himself for it. So,
not only that, he's recounting this memoir after the fact, and he includes this, that he, killed a man. Maybe it was manslaughter, maybe it was murder. Maybe it was just grievous bodily assault and the Martians did the rest. But he could have left it out. And he says that. I could have left it out.
Could have left it out.
But I'm not. I'm putting it in. You judge me how you will. Another nice little piece of forwarding or foreshadowing here. At that time, no one knew what food they needed. and then we get to this is weird. I think medicine is a little bit more advanced than Wells' knowledge of medicine at this point. I know we'd had the germ theory of disease for about 50 years, although it hadn't really taken solid hold yet. But the Martians feed by just taking blood and injecting it directly into their veins, bypassing, as Wells says, all the cumbersome machinery of taking meat and breaking it down and turning it into blood, as if somehow human beings consume blood in their daily life. And we do to an extent, but that's not what we're doing. We're also getting muscle and glycogen. Yes, so there's the machinery of the body is much more complicated than do I have an adequate source of blood. Yeah, that was kind of bizarre.
Yeah, that I don't know if that was simplification for the story, or if, like you say, he simply was not aware of the way things work.
I think. Well, there's another thing that makes me think he's not aware of the way things work. Was that he believes that the microorganisms on Earth are just plagues that we have to deal with, and he doesn't seem to be aware that human beings are mostly bacteria.
Yeah.
That we have essential gut flora that helps us. So.
Yeah. It is an interesting idea, though. What would happen if you designed a life form for which digestion was not necessary, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting to contemplate, could that evolve? Because, I mean, there would have had to be things running around with blood for it to evolve. And
Yes.
oddly enough, the things that the Martian brought with them were very human-like. But yeah, I mean, there's a certain level of efficiency there. I could get behind the idea.
So that's another thing which is interesting, where I think Wells sort of sets the tone for a lot of science fiction to come, is this idea of evolution and how evolution will proceed. And the theory of natural selection was also pretty new at this time. And there was still a sense that evolution was sort of driving towards some sort of pinnacle. And not as opposed to just sort of random selection. It's like, well, you're the fittest for this environment in this current environment. Okay.
As if evolution had agency of its
Yes.
own, yeah.
So his aliens, like a lot of aliens that come later, have evolved to be entirely mental, and they have gripping hands and tentacles, but they've done away with their bodies for the most part. They're just eyes and a brain and some teeny hands to manipulate things. And he sees that as the future of humanity if we live long enough. Yeah, which is kind of creepy and not particularly realistic, I don't think.
Talking about Wells bashing on religion, there's a point where he's with the artilleryman, and the artilleryman's talking about the Martians rounding up and cultivating humans as a food source.
Yes.
And the line is, "These cages will be full of psalms and hymns and piety."
Yeah.
That all the ones that are caught will turn to religion, to keep themselves happy and content in their incarceration until they're eaten.
As opposed to making a difficult choice and choosing to fight back.
Right.
They're going to content themselves with their lot. And it's certainly, as Marx has said, religion is the opiate of the masses. Yet our protagonist, I don't think I bookmarked this, when he realizes that all the Martians are dead, praises God. So maybe it's Wells has a problem with religion as opposed to spirituality, which is, certainly plausible.
Understandable.
Yeah. Oh, this was fascinating also. So one of the things that was amazing, Wells can't really do aside from the laser, the heat ray, which is incredible forecasting, he doesn't advance the science of the Martians very far at all. I mean, they're using a big gun to shoot them here. And the other thing is the Martians, once there's no air attack, there's no air support for any of their activity, but they are learning to fly on Earth, presumably because of the thicker atmosphere.
Yeah, they're overcoming that.
Yeah.
There's a moment there, and it's one of the most poignant parts of the book, shortly after the Thunder Child engages them and kills two of the Martians, allows the fleet to escape, but they see something escape above the smoke up into the air and then settle in the distance. We get this glimpse of, and it's never revisited.
Yeah.
We don't know if that was a Martian flying machine fleeing the scene. We don't know if that was, we don't know what it was, debris from an explosion. But he makes mention of it and everybody watching it. So it seems like it's something he should have come back to. Again, I like highlighting words. I don't know what they are. Briareus.
Oh, yeah. I remember encountering that word, and I don't know if I stopped to look it up.
In Greek mythology, there were three giants that had three monstrous giants of enormous size and strength, each one with 50 heads and 100 arms.
Wow. Okay. I don't remember reading that in my Greek mythology, but that's amazing.
He slips in a lot of, and some of it's just vocabulary of the day. I clicked on a lot of words to make sure that I understood what he was talking about.
There's
But
some
like he uses cumbered.
Oh, cumbered as opposed to encumbered.
Encumbered, yes.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I really enjoyed reading this, even though the story was a little lacking for me, and even though I kind of hate protagonists that don't have agency. This is my big problem with Frankenstein, by the way. I don't know if you've ever read Frankenstein. Mm-hmm. Frankenstein, the protagonist, is nominally a man of science, and he spends, I would say, half of the book unconscious because he's just fainting away at whatever, It's like, oh, and then I had the vapors and I fainted. It's like, good God.
That is a tedious book. I appreciate what it did for the genre and for the evolution of the literature, but that is a tedious book.
It is remarkable. It's incredible that it exists, and I think, without meaning to be sexist, it's incredible it was written by a woman. That a woman wrote this book. But
I think that the short story was actually a much better piece of literature than the novelization.
There's a short story? I didn't know that.
It was based on a short story.
I did not know that.
It was entered into as a writing competition to pass an evening.
I remember that.
Right.
Yeah.
But after the short stories were collected, she got encouraged by one of the other authors there to develop it.
Huh. Interesting. So this suffers a little bit from that. And
the brother, we spend maybe a quarter of the book with him relating events that happened to his brother. Yes. And they're all the same thing. We were trying to get away and it was hard.
Yes. Yeah.
I did not care at all about what
perspective shift is a little
happened to them.
weird, and it doesn't seem to add anything. And this is interesting also, that the entire book is framed, it's almost like a travelogue. It's like, well, this is what happened. Let me set down what happened so that man will never forget.
Yeah, and I kind of would really like to get a really big map of England and London and like put little pins, because he goes into such detail on the neighborhoods and the streets and the areas that he's in. I want to see if it actually makes sense.
Oh, it does. I looked it up, and someone actually put together a Google map and dropped pins in all the right places, and you can zoom in on it. And so Google War of the Worlds map, and
cool.
Yeah.
That would be like looking at Watership Down and seeing, what a small area this actually occurred in.
And apparently Wells lived in Woking. That's why he said it there. So, yeah.
Oh, good for him.
Yeah, so fascinating to revisit this after decades for me. And just, what a remarkable book. This was written before the Wright brothers. Yeah, so they talk about an invention of flying machines. Nobody knew that could be done. So it's just incredible.
It is, and there's a lot. There's some things that clearly don't hold up to our modern science and our modern understanding of things.
Of course not.
There's a lot here that does. And structurally and in terms of the story. Again, it's deliberately paced, but it unfolds nicely.
It made me. I think the only film I've seen of this is the Tom Cruise version. So I don't know the other films, but I think if there was going to be a new film version of this, I would like it to be set at exactly this time, because I think it works very, very well. And I think rather than dragging these characters and such into our present, spend more of the screenplay, the film time, sort of informing us about what the world was like back then. Because he takes that for granted, that what society is like, the state of science and everything like that. And we don't. We're 125 years removed from it. but it's that contrast that's fascinating. And so if you could just get, like, I'd love to see the scientists, sort of the astronomers, the little scene with the astronomers, like a flash on Mars, it's like, oh, what could that be? And the state of the art with germ theory and surgery and all of that would be just incredible. So
Yeah, again, it's just delightful. They're describing Mars, right? And this is the state of scientific understanding. Its physical condition is still largely a mystery, but we know now that even in its equatorial region, the midday temperature hardly approaches that of our coldest winter. Mm-hmm. Well, they're not wrong.
Yeah, hardly is a little bit of an understatement there.
Its air is much more attenuated than ours. Its oceans have shrunk until they cover but a third of its surface. And as its slow seasons change, huge snowcaps gather and melt about either pole.
I mean, this is what we thought at the time. That we saw
It's
some activity.
what we saw through the
we
telescopes
saw
of the
these big
time,
seas,
yeah.
and we didn't know that there weren't water in them.
Yeah.
And yet, okay, there's this passage from like the second page of the book. The planet Mars, I scarcely need remind the reader, revolves about the sun at a mean distance of 140 million miles, and the light he receives from the sun is barely half of that received by this world. So he's talking to a sophisticated readership. People know that you couldn't talk to the average person on the street and ask them how far away the Mars is from the sun and have them get anywhere close to 140 million miles.
I don't think I would have pulled that number out.
Yeah. I think one of the things we tend to forget is that even though the London of H.G. Wells' era was largely literate, that reading was mostly confined to the upper classes. And so you're writing for a very educated and very literate audience whose only means of entertainment was reading and conversation. People were hyper literate. The people who were literate were hyper literate, which is part of the fun of his, word choice and so on. Here, yeah.
One thing, and reading that a little bit reminded me, he's talking about Mars. Mars is dying. And this is why the Martians are driven to go out. And he extends that forward. He's like, what's happening to Mars is going to happen to us. They started earlier, so it's happening to them now. It's coming for us, and where are we going to turn?
Yes.
And unfortunately, there's nowhere for us to turn because when their attempt to invade Earth didn't work out, we now have observed them invading Venus.
Yes.
So if Venus were the next place to go, they've beaten us there.
Yeah. I think human beings are more resilient than Martians. So
Yeah, you say that today.
I have great hope for the future of humanity. Yeah, I hope to live long enough to see L5 cylinders. We can retire there. Yeah.
That would be cool.
Giant orbital structures. I don't think we need to set up colonies on Mars, but it would be cool if we did. But certainly, God, why aren't more people living in orbit right now? Yeah.
A fair question. All right. Last thoughts on War of the Worlds?
You said, we were talking before we started, so I just want to throw this out there, that you listen to the radio show every year on Halloween.
Every year on Halloween, I listen to the Mercury Theater
amazing.
broadcast.
And you've read the book like once every 10 years, probably for decades.
It's such a short read that the intervals are not that far. Every few years I pick it up again. It's on my short list of recurring favorites.
Do you read other Wells or just this one?
This might actually be no, I don't think it's the only Wells I've read, but it's the only recurring one.
So you don't go back to The Time Machine or Invisible Man or...
I didn't really, honestly, I didn't care for either of those. Again, they're interesting premises, but, the Time Machine, again, there's not a protagonist to sink your teeth into. And his vision of the far future is just appalling.
It is.
And the Invisible Man is a jerk.
Yeah. Yeah.
He goes nuts. Why? He had this thing that he did to himself. He goes completely bonkers and is just a terrible person for the entire book. So, yeah, I haven't gone back to those.
Fair enough. All right. So I think the fact you listen to the radio play every year might keep this current in your consciousness and be part of the fun of the
Probably
story.
So. Yeah. And that if you've never done that, you can find it on YouTube. I highly recommend you go check it out and find out what catapulted Orson Welles into his short-lived fame there.
Yeah.
And then you can follow that thought to its conclusion with Citizen Kane.
Yeah. All right. Well, this was fun. This was a really, really fun read. More for archaeological reasons than the story itself. But there's so much in here that's just delightful to experience. So,
Indeed. I really, really like this one. All right, so where are we going next?
Next, another story about planets. We are reading The Little Prince.
Woohoo! We've been meaning to get around to that one.
Yeah, that's on both of our lists. So yeah, I'm surprised we're only getting to it now.
All right, well, we'll see you in 2 weeks.
See you in 2 weeks.